At first, there was only unease, the quiet kind that circulates unspoken among medical staff. By 1981, the Administrative Review Board at St. Bartholomew Memorial Hospital had noted a statistically abnormal increase in postoperative complications, particularly among patients undergoing routine abdominal procedures. Internal reviews were conducted. Charts were audited. No concrete conclusions emerged. Recovery rates remained within tolerable limits. The attending surgeon in most cases, Dr. Raymond Housman, was highly regarded. No formal complaints had ever been lodged. Dr. Housman, aged 38 at the time, was seen as a steady presence in the operating wing. He never raised his voice. He never drank at staff functions. He was punctual, courteous, and well-liked, especially by junior residents, who described him as the kind of surgeon who made you feel safe. In his locker, he kept old surgical texts wrapped in plastic and a pristine pair of white clogs. Outside the hospital, he was reclusive. Divorced. Lived alone on the north edge of Franklin County. The first concrete irregularity came to light not through formal channels, but through suspicion voiced offhand during a lunch break. A scrub nurse, her name withheld for protection, told a colleague that she'd begun noticing procedural inconsistencies during open-cell cystitis surgeries, longer than expected incision times, unexplained extensions to liver lobes, specimens routed to pathology without clear documentation. The comment made its way, informally, to a surgical resident, Dr. Lila Moreno. She began watching closely. On May 12, 1983, Dr. Moreno assisted Housman during a scheduled gallbladder removal. The patient was a 44-year-old schoolteacher with no underlying liver conditions. When Moreno reviewed the postoperative imaging the following week, she found that nearly half the patient's left hepatic lobe had been resected, with no entry in the operative report to reflect the removal. She brought the discrepancy to Housman directly. His response was calm but firm: the liver showed necrotic margins. Nothing unusual. He closed the file and advised her to focus on her residency exam schedule. Moreno did not press further. But she began copying surgical records, quietly, methodically, over the next 3 months. At this stage, there was no indication of a broader crime. Only silence, and the sense that something in the OR was wrong. By late May 1983, Dr. Lila Moreno had compiled 6 patient charts, each tied to elective abdominal operations conducted under the direction of Dr. Housman. In each, internal documentation contained language that lacked clinical specificity: tissue anomaly, non-viable margin, or segmental pathology were cited as justifications for removing critical organ tissue not directly related to the presenting condition. In 4 cases, postoperative imaging showed significant loss of liver volume. In one, a nephrectomy was noted in records but absent from the surgical report entirely. Moreno's covert review extended to operating room logs. She noted that Housman's surgical sessions were consistently staffed by a narrow, recurring group: a senior scrub nurse, initials DM, a surgical tech, TL, and anesthesiologist Dr. Thomas Crenshaw. Cross-shift substitutions were rare. Recovery room staff were often excluded from handoff discussions, with post-op notes prepared exclusively by Housman. In July 1983, Moreno approached the hospital's risk management office. The director, Walter G. Linney, declined to initiate a formal review, citing Housman's spotless record and warning against unsubstantiated suspicion. Unwilling to abandon the matter, Moreno contacted a former university mentor, now employed at the Ohio State Medical Review Board. Within 2 weeks, an off-the-books inquiry was underway. Moreno was instructed to keep her observations internal. Meanwhile, the board issued an unannounced audit request to St. Bartholomew's administration under the guise of a surgical standards evaluation. Over 3 days in August, a team reviewed operative notes, imaging reports, and supply logs. While outward compliance appeared intact, one discovery proved anomalous: repeated requisition of formalin-preserved tissue samples from Housman's cases, each listed generically as non-diagnostic residual mass. None were ever logged into hospital pathology. Simultaneously, financial records linked to Columbia Tissue Logistics, a nondescript third-party courier used occasionally by the hospital, were pulled. Incorporated in 1977, its Columbus address was tied to a mailbox rental facility. The company had received consistent payment transfers, always cash, from an account traced to a Raymond Housman trust. By September, enough circumstantial indicators had emerged to warrant deeper scrutiny. A multi-agency task group was convened, operating under a confidentiality directive. Surveillance was placed on Housman's home and private vehicle. Operating room cameras, previously installed under hospital safety protocols, were reviewed selectively. A recording dated September 14, 1983, showed Housman exiting the surgical wing at 4:23 hours, after completing a routine appendectomy. In his possession, a red biohazard canister, unsealed, clearly visible. Security logs recorded no reason for the transport. The container was not returned. 2 days later, the patient from that operation was readmitted in severe distress. Imaging revealed removal of the right kidney, undocumented, unexplained. For the first time, state investigators classified the situation as a potential criminal matter. Following the incident on September 14, 1983, where post-op imaging confirmed the undocumented nephrectomy of a 39-year-old male patient, name redacted for HIPAA compliance, federal attention intensified. On September 21, a sealed memorandum from the Ohio State Medical Review Board formally referred the case to the FBI Columbus Division under suspicion of interstate organ trafficking. Initial interviews with staff at St. Bartholomew Memorial revealed little. When questioned separately, anesthesiologist Dr. Thomas Crenshaw claimed ignorance regarding any deviation from standard procedure. However, under surveillance, Crenshaw was observed meeting twice at night with a courier registered to Columbia Tissue Logistics. Both exchanges occurred in the rear parking lot of the hospital, beneath the waste dock camera blind spot. Further analysis of Columbia's shipping manifests, acquired through a subpoena served on its registered agent, revealed a recurring route: Columbus, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Elizabeth, New Jersey. The cargo, medical-grade coolers, declared as non-viable pathology samples. Shipping weight suggested full organ mass rather than cellular biopsies. By early October 1983, agents installed a covert GPS tracker on Housman's personal vehicle, a 1980 Mercury Marquis. Between October 3 and 11, the car made 3 unaccounted stops near the shipping depot listed under Columbia's name. Each visit occurred within 48 hours of a scheduled surgery. One stop coincided with an open-cell cystitis operation on a 62-year-old female patient. Her surgery was logged as successful. However, when contacted later through follow-up health outreach, she reported persistent abdominal weakness. Upon her consent, an independent CT scan was ordered. The results confirmed absence of 45% of her liver's right lobe, a survivable but medically unjustified removal, concealed by falsified documentation. The net began to close when 2 surgical nurses independently reached out to the review board, anonymously, at first. Both indicated they had participated in operations where standard protocols were ignored or overridden. One nurse stated that during procedures, extra tissue was placed into unmarked containers without specimen tags. The second, more direct, admitted that she had been paid in cash to ask no questions. On October 19, 1983, a federal warrant was secured to begin forensic auditing of St. Bartholomew's surgical archives and video monitoring systems. In the early hours of October 24, investigators retrieved camera footage showing Housman exiting the OR with a container identical to those used by Columbia, again, unsealed, and without accompaniment. This time, he was followed. The container was traced to a drop-off location behind a derelict warehouse in the Brewery District. A rental van arrived less than an hour later. When agents moved to intercept, the driver fled on foot, abandoning the cargo. Inside the van, 3 sealed coolers, one tagged for Elizabeth, New Jersey. Contents included a full human kidney, a partial liver segment, and an adrenal gland. None were labeled with donor consent, hospital ID, or pathological requisition forms. The case was no longer an internal hospital matter. It was now a federal crime. With evidence recovered from the October 24 drop site confirming illicit organ transport, the investigation transitioned to active interdiction. A federal task force, comprising agents from the FBI, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, was formally established under the operation title Hemlock. Task force priority shifted to identifying the scope of Dr. Raymond Housman's co-conspirators and determining whether patient selection was random or part of a structured acquisition plan. Initial data suggested target patients were those undergoing non-emergency abdominal surgeries where full sedation and extended internal access were medically standard but not always necessary. Victims had not consented to any procedure involving organ donation or experimental resection. On November 1, 1983, a court-ordered audit of Columbia Tissue Logistics financials revealed systematic cash deposits made by shell companies traced back to international recipients, primarily in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. The amounts transferred per shipment averaged $12,000 to $18,000, consistent with known black market pricing for viable organs during that period. Surveillance of Housman intensified. On November 7, agents documented his direct involvement in preparing unauthorized specimens post-surgery. In one instance, recorded via or camera time-stamped 3:12 hours, Housman was seen isolating a kidney, wrapping it in ice-soaked gauze, and placing it into a specimen bin that bypassed hospital lab delivery logs. Scrub nurse DM appeared in the footage assisting the wrap process. At no point was the removed organ referenced in the surgical notes. On November 13, the nurse was detained under sealed warrant. In exchange for partial immunity, she confirmed that between 1980 and 1983, Housman conducted at least 25 off-record extractions in her presence. She described a consistent protocol: once the surgical objective was complete, and anesthesia levels remained deep, Housman would extend the incision under justification of tissue instability. Organs deemed viable were removed and sealed on site. She further disclosed that all participants were paid in cash, handed over in sterile surgical glove boxes following each operation. Anesthesiologist Dr. Thomas Crenshaw was detained on November 19. He initially denied involvement but was confronted with photographic evidence showing his presence at an unauthorized specimen handoff in October. Within 48 hours, Crenshaw confessed to receiving over $110,000 in illicit payments over a 5-year span. His role: to maintain deep anesthesia levels, obscure vital fluctuations, and ensure records showed no deviation. By late November, the operation's full network began to unravel. An internal memo from Housman's bank, obtained via subpoena, revealed repeated deposits just under federal reporting thresholds, classic structuring behavior to avoid detection. Surveillance logs showed his frequent visits to a P.O. box in Newark, from which routing slips for Columbia shipments were recovered. The final confirmation came on December 2, when a former surgical resident, now practicing in Cleveland, provided a signed affidavit. He recalled being warned during his rotation not to interfere if Dr. Housman extends a procedure. He witnessed one such surgery where, post-closure, an ice bin left the room without ever entering the specimen chain. The affidavit confirmed what investigators had suspected: Housman had not only acted alone, but built a compliant ring around himself, coercing silence through money, authority, and control of hospital process. On December 5, a federal arrest warrant was drafted. On December 7, 1983, at approximately 6:42 hours, federal agents executed a coordinated arrest operation at Dr. Raymond Housman's residence located on County Line Road, just outside Columbus, Ohio. Housman was taken into custody without resistance. He was dressed in surgical scrubs, coffee still brewing in the kitchen, indicating he had prepared to report for his usual morning rotation. A simultaneous search of the premises uncovered $38,200 in cash stored in vacuum-sealed freezer bags inside a false-bottom freezer drawer. 8 glass jars containing human biological tissue submerged in formalin. A ledger book listing patient initials, procedure dates, and organ notations, e.g., RK for right kidney, S3L for segment 3 of liver. routing slips corresponding to previously identified Columbia tissue logistics shipments. A locked steel container holding surgical-grade specimen bags and travel-size coolers. At St. Bartholomew Memorial Hospital, administrators were informed of the arrest before Housman's scheduled 8 o'clock procedure. His name was scrubbed from staff rosters by noon. Emergency credential suspensions were issued for the implicated staff. All scheduled surgeries involving general anesthesia were postponed pending case review. During his initial FBI interview, conducted at the Columbus field office, Housman remained composed. When presented with the evidence, he requested an attorney and declined further questions. However, within 72 hours, 3 co-conspirators provided signed statements under plea agreements, detailing the scheme in full. Dr. Thomas Crenshaw confirmed that organ removals were coordinated based on viability and market demand. The nurse identified as DM confirmed routine delivery coordination with out-of-state intermediaries. On December 14, a federal grand jury returned a 17-count indictment against Housman. Charges included interstate trafficking in human organs, aggravated assault resulting in permanent bodily harm, conspiracy to defraud medical insurance programs, falsification of medical records, criminal enterprise under RICO statute. Bail was denied. Housman was remanded to federal custody at the Franklin County Detention Facility under isolation conditions due to risk of retaliation by other inmates. The federal trial of Dr. Raymond Housman commenced on March 5, 1984, in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Ohio. Presided over by Judge Harold F. Klein, the trial was designated high security and media restricted due to the unprecedented nature of the crimes and the potential disruption to ongoing medical investigations nationwide. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Martin Keever, opened with a statement summarizing the government's position, that Dr. Housman had violated both the Hippocratic Oath and federal law by engaging in a systematic removal of internal organs from unsuspecting patients, motivated by financial gain and facilitated through a trusted position of medical authority. Evidentiary presentation. Over the course of 19 trial days, the prosecution presented extensive physical, testimonial, and forensic evidence, including surgical video footage showing unauthorized extraction of organs from 3 patients. Handwritten records from Housman's personal logbook cataloging organ removal by code. Testimony from 6 patients who had suffered permanent physiological damage. Transaction ledgers and matching shipment records tied to Columbia tissue logistics. Forensic analysis confirming that tissues recovered from the intercepted van in October 1983 genetically matched patients on file at St. Bartholomew Memorial. Among the most compelling witnesses was Dr. Lila Moreno, whose early efforts initiated the investigation. Under oath, she described how she discovered the missing liver segment in a post-op patient and how hospital administrators failed to act on her warnings. Her calm, precise delivery reinforced the prosecution's portrait of Housman as someone whose crimes were enabled by silence and institutional deference. The defense, led by attorney Gerald T. Prindle, acknowledged that surgical irregularities occurred but denied criminal intent. Prindle argued that Housman acted under misguided medical judgment, citing ambiguous pathology and vague intraoperative conditions. He described his client as a man consumed by complex decisions, not a criminal. However, under cross-examination, defense witnesses struggled to explain the cash deposits, undocumented specimen removals, and the use of an unregistered shipping entity. Jury and verdict. On April 2, 1984, after approximately 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts on all 17 counts. Notably, they affirmed the RICO charge, confirming the operation's status as an ongoing criminal enterprise. Sentencing. On May 14, 1984, Dr. Raymond E. Housman was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. An additional 40 years for aggravated medical fraud and conspiracy. Permanent revocation of his medical license, effective immediately. Institutional fallout. The trial prompted immediate reviews of credentialing procedures at hospitals throughout the Midwest. St. Bartholomew Memorial was fined $2.3 million under federal oversight terms and later restructured under new management. The Ohio State Medical Review Board issued a formal apology to victims and implemented a mandatory dual-signature protocol for organ-related procedures. Patient aftermath. Of the 47 confirmed victims, 39 survived. Many required lifelong medical management, including dialysis and immunosuppressant therapy. A federal compensation fund was established in June 1984. Dr. Housman was transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he remained under special administrative measures. Dr. Raymond Housman remained incarcerated at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute under high-security conditions following his 1984 conviction. He did not appeal his sentence. Over the next several years, Housman maintained a low profile in custody. He granted no interviews, received few visitors, and corresponded only with legal counsel. His only known statement, recorded during a psychiatric evaluation in 1987, read, "Everything removed was unnecessary. I did them a favor." In 1991, internal reviews of inmate health records revealed that Housman had developed early-onset liver cirrhosis. He refused surgical intervention. On January 4, 1993, he was found unresponsive in his cell during morning rounds. Cause of death was listed as hepatic failure. No foul play was suspected. He was 50 years old. Following Housman's death, remaining forensic evidence held in federal archives was reclassified for review. In 1996, at the request of surviving victims and with the emergence of improved genetic testing protocols, the FBI authorized DNA reanalysis of tissue samples recovered from the 1983 Columbia van seizure. Mitochondrial DNA confirmed matches to 6 individual patients, definitively linking Housman's specimens to known victims. In 1999, the U.S. Department of Justice published a white paper on the case, listing U.S. v. Housman as a foundational example of illicit organ trafficking through medical infrastructure. It was used in the development of nationwide patient consent reforms and mandatory third-party verification procedures for surgical extractions. The hospital once known as St. Bartholomew Memorial no longer exists. The facility was sold in 1987 and demolished in 1992. A medical training center was built on the site but does not acknowledge the case in its public history. By 2001, the Housman file was officially reclassified as closed, fully adjudicated. All known participants in the enterprise either served prison sentences or received professional bans. Public access to selected case materials was granted under FOIA Section 552(b)(7), with redactions to protect victim identities. Of the original 47 known victims, 24 participated in a class action settlement finalized in 1998. Others chose anonymity. Though the details have faded from public memory, within law enforcement and surgical ethics circles, the case remains an enduring cautionary reference, that even in the most controlled, sterile environments, the gravest violations can occur, unseen, uninterrupted, beneath the scrubs of trust.